I am Lieutenant Commander Marcus Sterling, and this is my account of what happened when humanity finally went too far. When I first enlisted in the Terran Defense Force, 15 years ago, we were considered little more than an annoyance by the galactic community. The hegemony of Andromeda, the Crystalline Confederacy, and the Zephyrian Empire had ruled the known galaxy for millennia, treating humanity like unruly children who had just discovered fire. But they underestimated us. They always did. The year was 2387 and tensions had been escalating for months. Trade disputes, territorial disagreements, and the usual diplomatic posturing that preceded every major conflict in galactic history. What no one expected was how quickly everything would spiral out of control. I was serving aboard the TSS Retribution, a Prometheus-class heavy cruiser stationed at the edge of the Rigel sector. Captain Sarah Mitchell commanded our vessel with the kind of iron discipline that had become the hallmark of human naval officers. We had been conducting routine patrols when our sensors detected an approaching formation of ships, 12 vessels flying the colors of the Zephyrian Empire. "Contact on the main screen," announced Ensign Rodriguez from the sensor station. The view screen flickered to life, showing the distinctive teardrop-shaped hulls of Zephyrian warships. Even from a distance, their organic curves and bioluminescent panels were unmistakable. "Hail them," Captain Mitchell ordered, her voice steady. "Let's see what they want." The response came faster than expected. The lead Zephyrian vessel, a massive dreadnought twice our size, opened a channel. The alien commander's image filled our screen. Tall, ethereal, with translucent skin that revealed the network of luminous organs beneath. When it spoke, its voice carried the typical Zephyrian condescension. "Human vessel, you are in violation of the Arcturus Accords. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." Captain Mitchell's jaw tightened. The Arcturus Accords had been signed 200 years ago, establishing zones of influence throughout the galaxy. But the sector we were patrolling had been specifically designated as neutral space only 50 years prior. The Zephyrians were making a claim that had no basis in current galactic law. "Zephyrian vessel, this is Captain Mitchell of the Terran Defense Force. Our charts show this sector as a neutral space. We are conducting lawful operations under the Treaty of New Geneva." The alien commander's expression darkened. "Your primitive understanding of galactic law is irrelevant. You have 30 seconds to begin your withdrawal." I watched from my position at the tactical station as the captain's hands clenched into fists. We all knew what this was really about. The Zephyrians had been pressuring humanity to abandon several mining colonies in the outer rim, claiming the worlds were too close to their territory. This supposed violation was just an excuse to force a confrontation. "All hands, battle stations," Captain Mitchell announced over the ship's intercom. The bridge erupted into controlled chaos as officers rushed to their positions. Red alert lights bathed everything in crimson, and the steady thrum of our reactor increased as power was diverted to weapons and shields. "Captain," I called out, "they're powering weapons. Multiple contacts breaking formation." "Maintain defensive posture," she replied. "Broadcast wide beam to all Terran vessels in the sector. We may need backup." What happened next would be debated in war colleges. For generations, the Zephyrian dreadnought fired first, a brilliant lance of plasma that would have crippled most vessels. But the Retribution wasn't most vessels. Our newly installed Drake-class deflector shields absorbed the blast, converting the energy into a harmless light show. "Return fire," Captain Mitchell commanded. "All forward batteries target their weapon systems." Our particle cannons spoke as one, sending streams of accelerated matter toward the alien ships. The Zephyrians, expecting an easy victory against what they saw as inferior human technology, were caught off guard. Our first volley disabled 2 of their destroyers and severely damaged a third. But that was just the beginning. Captain Mitchell activated the tactical display showing the positions of both fleets. "Marcus," she said, using my first name in that way that always preceded a dangerous order, "initiate Protocol 7. Protocol 7. I had hoped I would never hear those words. It was one of several classified tactical procedures developed by Admiral Harrison Vance, the architect of humanity's new military doctrine. The other senior officers on the bridge exchanged worried glances. They knew, as I did, that Protocol 7 crossed lines that had never been crossed before. "Captain, are you certain?" I asked, my finger hovering over the authorization panel. "Do it." I entered my authorization code, and the ship's computer began implementing a series of maneuvers that would have been considered impossible by galactic military standards. The Retribution's reactor output increased beyond safety parameters, feeding power to systems that were never meant to operate simultaneously. Our ship suddenly accelerated to nearly 70% light speed, a velocity that should have liquefied our crew despite the inertial dampeners. But Dr. Vanessa Chen's modifications to our neural interface systems allowed us to maintain consciousness and coordination at speeds that would have been fatal to any other species in the galaxy. The Zephyrians watched in horror as we performed a maneuver that their computers calculated as impossible. We phased through their formation, our quantum-shifted hull passing through their shields as if they didn't exist. In the space of 12 seconds, we had maneuvered behind their entire fleet. "Fire at will," Captain Mitchell ordered. What followed was less a battle than a demonstration. The Zephyrians, built for elegant long-range engagement, found themselves outmaneuvered by an opponent who had rewritten the basic rules of space combat. Our weapons cores, charged with exotic matter from our modified reactors, tore through their hulls like paper. But it was the psychological impact that truly broke them. The Zephyrian military had dominated space for over 4,000 years. Their tactics, refined across millennia of warfare, were considered the pinnacle of strategic excellence. To be so completely outclassed by a species they considered barely civilized was devastating to their morale. The engagement lasted 18 minutes. When it was over, 8 Zephyrian ships had been destroyed, 3 were drifting powerless, and 1, the Dreadnought, had fled the system. We had suffered minor damage to our secondary shields. "Cease fire!" Captain Mitchell commanded. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of our engines and the soft beeping of status displays. I stared at the tactical screen, watching the debris field that had once been a Zephyrian task force. The magnitude of what we had just accomplished began to sink in. We hadn't just won a battle. We had shattered the fundamental assumption that had governed galactic politics for millennia, that humanity was weak. Captain Communications Officer Thompson reported, "We're receiving priority transmissions from Terran Command Hegemony Central and the Crystalline Confederacy. Everyone wants to know what happened here." "Route the Terran Command transmission to my ready room," Captain Mitchell replied. "Thompson, send our tactical logs to Admiral Vance. With my personal authentication, he'll want a full analysis." As the captain left the bridge, I found myself staring at the wreckage on the screen. Part of me felt a surge of pride. We had proven that humanity deserved its place among the galactic powers. But another part of me wondered what we had just unleashed. Over the following weeks, reports began filtering in from across the galaxy. Other human vessels were implementing similar tactics, and the results were consistently devastating for our opponents. The Crystalline Confederacy attempted to blockade the Sol system and lost an entire battle group to the TSS Excalibur. The Hegemony of Andromeda sued for peace after 3 of their core worlds were cut off from supply lines by human fast attack squadrons. But it was what happened at the Battle of Kepler 442 that truly showed how far we had gone. I was transferred to the TSS Thunderbolt, a new Titan-class battleship under the command of Captain William Harrison, Admiral Vance's nephew. Our mission was to break the siege of New Sarajevo, a human colony that had been surrounded by a combined fleet from all 3 major galactic powers. The numbers were daunting. Nearly 200 enemy vessels had formed a blockade around the planet, including several super dreadnoughts that dwarfed anything in the human fleet. Conventional tactics would have called for a gradual approach, perhaps negotiations to break up the alliance. Captain Harrison had other ideas. "Gentlemen," he announced to the senior staff in the war room. "We're going to end this siege in a way that ensures it never happens again." He activated the tactical display, showing the enemy formation. Intelligence indicates they're using the planet's gravity well to anchor their defensive grid. They expect us to approach from the outer system, giving them time to prepare. He touched a control, and the display zoomed in on New Sarajevo itself. "Instead, we're going quantum jumping directly into the planetary atmosphere." The room fell silent. Quantum jumping, or Q jumping as we called it, was dangerous enough in open space. Attempting it within a gravity well, particularly one as complex as a terrestrial planet's, was considered suicide by every navy in the galaxy. "Sir," Lieutenant Commander Barnes ventured, "the gravitational shear alone would tear us apart." "Not with the new hull modifications," Captain Harrison replied with a smile that made me deeply uncomfortable. "Dr. Rodriguez has installed quantum anchor points throughout the ship. We'll phase shift for exactly 0.003 seconds, just long enough to bypass their outer defenses." I reviewed the tactical data, running calculations in my head. The plan was audacious beyond belief, but the mathematics actually worked. The enemy fleet was positioned to defend against threats from space, not from within their own formation. "What about civilian casualties?" I asked. Captain Harrison's expression darkened. "The enemy bombardment has killed over 3 million colonists already. Sometimes you have to make hard choices to prevent worse outcomes." 24 hours later, we executed the maneuver. The sensation of Q-jumping is difficult to describe to someone who hasn't experienced it. For a fraction of a second, you exist in a state between dimensions where the normal laws of physics don't apply. Most crew members report seeing strange lights, hearing impossible sounds, experiencing memories that aren't their own. We materialized inside the atmosphere of New Sarajevo, 15 kilometers above the planet's capital city. The sight that greeted us was both magnificent and terrifying. The enemy fleet, caught completely off guard, was scattered around us in a formation designed for orbital defense, not point-blank combat. "All batteries fire at will," Captain Harrison commanded. What followed has been called the 6-minute massacre by historians. At such close range, our weapons were able to penetrate shields and armor that would have deflected them at a distance. The enemy ships, massive and powerful, but built for long-range engagement, were unable to bring their primary weapons to bear. In 6 minutes, we destroyed 47 vessels, including 3 super dreadnoughts. The remaining ships, their formation shattered, and their commanders in shock began a chaotic retreat. Many collided with each other in their desperation to escape the impossible sight of a human battleship fighting from within the planet's atmosphere. But the real impact of the battle wasn't measured in ships destroyed or tactical objectives achieved. As news of the engagement spread throughout the galaxy, something fundamental shifted in the balance of power. The hegemony of Andromeda was the first to capitulate, offering to recognize all human territorial claims in exchange for a non-aggression pact. The Crystalline Confederacy followed within weeks, opening trade negotiations that had been stalled for decades. Even the proud Zephyrian Empire, their fleet decimated, and their military reputation in ruins, began sending diplomatic overtures to Earth. But victory, I learned, often carries a price that's only apparent in hindsight. I was promoted to commander and transferred to Terran Fleet headquarters on Mars. My new position gave me access to intelligence reports from across the galaxy, and what I read disturbed me deeply. Yes, we had won the war, but the methods we had used to achieve that victory were creating new problems. Several of the smaller galactic powers were forming mutual defense pacts, sharing technology and resources in preparation for what they saw as inevitable human aggression. Refugee populations from war-torn worlds were flooding into neutral systems, straining resources, and creating humanitarian crises. Most troubling of all, there were reports of human commanders going beyond their orders using the new protocols in situations that didn't warrant such extreme measures. The breaking point came during what would later be known as the Procyon incident. The Procyon system had been contested territory for centuries, claimed by both humans and the Aquatic Confederation, a collection of water-based species that had remained neutral throughout the recent conflicts. When negotiations stalled, Captain David Reeves of the TSS Nemesis decided to implement Protocol 12. Protocol 12 was one of Admiral Vance's most extreme tactical innovations. It involved using a ship's quantum drive to create a localized reality distortion, effectively turning space itself into a weapon. The protocol had only been tested in computer simulations, and every model showed a 30% chance of catastrophic system-wide effects. Captain Reeves didn't care about the risks. His orders were to secure the system, and he was going to follow them regardless of the consequences. I was in Admiral Henderson's office when the reports came in. The reality distortion had worked exactly as designed, disabling every ship in the Procyon system instantaneously. But it had also created a cascade effect that destabilized the system's primary star. Within hours, Procyon had gone nova, obliterating 4 inhabited worlds and killing over 6 billion sentient beings. Admiral Henderson, a career officer who had served with distinction for 40 years, sat down heavily in his chair and put his head in his hands. "What have we become?" he asked quietly. The question haunted me for days. We had set out to prove that humanity deserved respect, that we were more than the primitive warmongers our enemies claimed we were. Instead, we had become something worse than anything the galaxy had seen in millennia. The political fallout from Procyon was swift and severe. The Galactic Council, which had previously excluded humanity from major decisions, passed a unanimous resolution condemning our actions and demanding the dismantling of our advanced weapons programs. Several human colonies declared independence rather than be associated with Earth's military policies. 3 of our most important allies severed diplomatic relations. But perhaps the most significant consequence was the change in how other species viewed us. The contempt and dismissiveness were gone, replaced by something far worse: fear. Not the healthy respect that comes from military competence, but the primal terror inspired by an unpredictable predator. I remember attending a diplomatic function on Centauri Prime 6 months after Procyon. The representatives from various galactic powers were polite, professional, and absolutely terrified. When I approached the bar, an entire group of Andromedan diplomats excused themselves and moved to the other side of the room. A crystalline ambassador, who had been chatting pleasantly with a Terran trade representative, cut the conversation short when I joined them. We had wanted to be taken seriously. Instead, we had become the monsters parents used to frighten their children. Admiral Vance, the architect of our new military doctrine, was quietly removed from his position. Officially, he was reassigned to research duties. Unofficially, he was under house arrest on a military facility in the outer colonies, his work classified at the highest levels, and his access to active military units revoked. I requested a transfer to a non-combat position and was assigned to the diplomatic corps. My new job was to help rebuild the relationships that our military success had shattered. It was during this assignment that I truly began to understand the long-term consequences of our actions. The galaxy was changing in ways we hadn't anticipated. The old power structures were collapsing, but what was replacing them was chaos rather than a new order. Without the stability provided by the traditional galactic powers, trade routes were disrupted. Territorial disputes erupted everywhere, and smaller conflicts flared up across dozens of systems. Piracy became endemic as former military vessels were abandoned or sold to the highest bidder. Refugee populations, displaced by our various military actions, created instability wherever they settled. Most disturbing of all, some of the protocols we had developed were being reverse-engineered by other species, leading to an arms race that made our previous advantages obsolete. The irony wasn't lost on me. We had fought to establish humanity as a major galactic power, and we had succeeded beyond our wildest dreams. But the galaxy we now dominated was a broken, fractured shell of its former self. I think about Commander Torres often. She was my counterpart on the TSS Defiant, one of the ships that implemented Protocol 7 during the early stages of the war. 3 months after the cessation of hostilities, she put a plasma pistol to her head and pulled the trigger. Her suicide note was brief. "We became everything we fought against." The truth is, she was right. In our determination to prove ourselves worthy of respect, we had abandoned the principles that made us worthy of anything at all. We had become bullies on a galactic scale, using superior firepower to impose our will on civilizations that had existed for millennia. Dr. Helena Vasquez, a xenopsychologist at the Colonial University, published a paper that became required reading at Starfleet Academy. In it, she argued that humanity's rapid military success had actually set back our integration into galactic society by centuries. We had gained fear but lost trust. We had achieved dominance but forfeited legitimacy. The question, she wrote, is not whether humanity went too far. The question is whether we can find our way back. I've spent the last 5 years trying to answer that question. As the director of interspecies relations, I've worked to rebuild diplomatic ties with former enemies to establish humanitarian aid programs for war-torn regions and to develop new protocols that emphasize cooperation over domination. Progress has been slow. The Zephyrian Empire still refuses direct contact with human officials, conducting all negotiations through neutral intermediaries. The hegemony has established trade relations, but only on terms heavily favorable to them. The Crystalline Confederacy has been more receptive, but their society is inherently cautious, and trust once broken takes generations to rebuild. Perhaps the most encouraging development has been the emergence of younger voices within human society, officers and diplomats who view our military victories not as triumphs to be celebrated, but as mistakes to be learned from. They understand that true power doesn't come from the ability to destroy, but from the ability to create, to build, to bring disparate groups together toward common goals. Lieutenant Sarah Park, one of my most promising junior officers, recently submitted a proposal for a new approach to interspecies relations. Instead of trying to dominate or even compete with other civilizations, she suggested focusing on what humanity does best: adaptation and innovation. Her proposal outlined programs for joint scientific research, cultural exchanges, and collaborative exploration of uncharted regions. "We've proven we can break things," she told me during our meeting. "Maybe it's time to prove we can build them too." I approved her proposal immediately. The war that began with a chance encounter in the Rigel sector lasted 18 months. In that time, we revolutionized space combat, toppled governments that had stood for millennia, and established humanity as the dominant military force in the galaxy. We achieved everything we thought we wanted. The peace that followed has lasted 5 years so far, and we're still dealing with the consequences. Entire civilizations are rebuilding from the ground up. Trade networks that took centuries to establish have been replaced by newer, more fragile arrangements. The delicate balance of power that had maintained galactic stability for thousands of years has been permanently shattered. But perhaps in the long run, that's not entirely a bad thing. The old system was stable, yes, but it was also stagnant. It kept smaller species marginalized, maintained rigid hierarchies, and stifled innovation. Our actions, extreme as they were, have created opportunities for new voices to be heard, new ideas to flourish, and new alliances to form. The Outer Rim Coalition, a partnership between 12 previously minor species, has become a significant political force. The Galactic Council has been restructured to include representatives from civilizations that were previously ignored. Even within the former major powers, there are movements toward more democratic governance and greater openness to outsiders. We went too far. There's no question about that. We used weapons and tactics that should never have been deployed, caused suffering that cannot be undone, and set precedents that continue to threaten galactic stability. But we also broke apart a system that had kept most of the galaxy's population under the thumb of a few ancient empires. The question now is not whether we can undo what we've done, We can't. The question is whether we can build something better from the ashes of what we destroyed. As I write this report, I'm looking out at the stars from my office on the lunar surface. Somewhere out there, human ships are working alongside former enemies to establish new trade routes. Human scientists are collaborating with crystalline researchers on revolutionary propulsion technologies. Human diplomats are mediating disputes between species that have been at war for centuries. We proved we could go too far. Now we're learning whether we can come back. The galaxy will never be the same. For better or worse, humanity has left its mark on the cosmos in ways that will be felt for millennia to come. Whether that mark is ultimately seen as a scar or as the foundation for something greater depends on the choices we make in the years ahead. I've seen what we're capable of when we decide that might makes right. I've witnessed the terrible efficiency of our war machine and the devastation it can cause. But I've also seen young officers like Lieutenant Park who understand that our true strength lies not in our ability to dominate others, but in our capacity to bring out the best in them. The old humanity that first reached for the stars was driven by curiosity and wonder. Somewhere along the way, we lost that. We became focused on proving ourselves instead of discovering ourselves. We chose conquest over cooperation, dominance over diplomacy. But we haven't lost those original qualities entirely. They're still there, buried under years of military conditioning and nationalist pride. The challenge is to rediscover what made us worth respecting in the first place, and to use that to build bridges instead of burning them. The war is over. The real work is just beginning. I think about that day in the Rigel sector often. The moment when everything changed. If Captain Mitchell had chosen differently, if the Zephyrians had been more reasonable, if any one of a dozen factors had been different, perhaps the galaxy would have found a different path forward. But history doesn't work in hypotheticals. We made our choices, and now we live with the consequences. The best we can do is try to learn from our mistakes and work toward a future that honors the sacrifices made by all sides. The memorial wall in the lobby of our building lists the names of every sentient being killed in what historians call the Human Hegemony War. The list is long. Millions of names from dozens of species. Both human and alien names are mixed together, arranged not by species or allegiance, but simply by the date of their death. I stop by that wall every morning before I start work. It reminds me why we can't afford to go too far again. It reminds me that behind every tactical decision, every strategic victory, every diplomatic breakthrough, there are real people with real lives hanging in the balance. We went too far once. The challenge now is to ensure we never do it again while still moving forward toward a future where all species can coexist with dignity and respect. The stars are still out there waiting for us to explore them. But this time, perhaps we can do so as partners rather than conquerors, as friends rather than enemies. This time, perhaps we can go just far enough